Over the past few years, there has been an explosion in the variety of browsers that are available. This is great for the web, but it makes browser testing extremely complex. Let's take a look at a few ways we can approach this growing problem. I wish I could say that browser testing breaks down into two major categories, or that there's some elegant hierarchy of tests and domains of knowledge. The truth is, browser testing is a very fragmented and complex topic, so we'll be approaching this one step at a time. Web technologies like HTML and CSS were designed so that they could be interpreted by different browsers on different platforms and produce similar results. This sounds easy enough, but in practice, things don't always work out so easily. To make a website cross-browser compatible, we first have to define what that means. Does it mean that it looks and functions exactly the same way in every browser? Does it mean that it works in a few modern browsers and not others? Or does it mean that it looks and functions roughly the same in most browsers? Browser testing can sometimes be a controversial topic because while some people are pixel perfectionists and strongly believe that a website should look exactly the same in all target browsers, there are plenty of other people that strongly believe that it doesn't matter and that it's okay if websites look different in various browsers. This website, for example, at the URL "Do websites need to look exactly the same in every browser.com" states their opinion very plainly. There's no right or wrong answers here, and you have to define what cross-browser goals you have for your website. The good news is that, in general, the more browsers you support, the more people that you'll be able to reach. The bad news is that, in general, it's more expensive and time-consuming to support a wide variety of browsers and browser versions. The law of diminishing returns most definitely applies here. Once you get past the major browsers, it becomes less and less beneficial to spend the time fixing bugs in obscure browsers or increasingly older versions of those browsers. In many cases, making a particular feature work might even be impossible. So if you're like most organizations and you're trying to balance the cost of supporting an old browser versus the benefit of reaching a small minority of users, how do you decide what browsers you should support? The obvious place to look is browser market share statistics, which are readily available in a variety of places. This is only helpful to a point though, because hardly ever is any one particular website representative of the overall browser market. The trick isn't to target particular browsers. Rather, you need to target a particular market and figure out what browsers they use. For example, if your audience is a bunch of technology geeks, chances are good that most of them will be using modern browsers, to the point that you may not even need to check your site in older browsers because only one or two people will ever see it like that. If you already have an established audience, this might be as simple as checking out your site analytics and seeing which browsers are most popular. If you're building a brand new website with no audience, you'll have to do some research and make some assumptions. It's also important to consider your target market because the term old browser is relative to your audience. So, for example, if you still have a small number of site visitors on Internet Explorer 6 and a few more on 7, then maybe 6 and 7 can be considered old browsers. If your users are so technically savvy that they're using alpha versions of Firefox and nightly builds of WebKit, then maybe the last 1 or 2 stable versions of those browsers can be considered old. It all depends on your audience, and you'll need to evolve your website over time as your users continue to upgrade their browsers. The size of your audience is important too. If you're working on a small personal blog, you might be able to get away with ignoring a few rendering errors if a tiny percentage of visitors are on an older browser. It may not be a very important website, and not very many people will be impacted by some minor cross-browser issues. However, if you're working on, say, a major banking website, the rules change. 2% of people using an old or obscure browser might not seem like a problem at first. After all, targeting many browsers is difficult and can be very expensive. However, that tiny percentage of people could represent thousands or even millions of users. So you have to be aware of situations where you're limiting your potential market and even making people angry because your site appears to be broken. As I mentioned earlier, cross-browser testing is a complex topic, so there are many different opinions. In the next video, we'll take a look at some tools that can make browser testing a bit easier.